Paige, thanks so much for being with us. I'm Helen, Head of People and Partnerships at Cadence.
My name is Paige Goldstein, and I have been a digital nomad working remotely for the past 3 years, and am a co-host of Fill Your Soul podcast, where we talk about remote work and the future of remote work and how people are using remote work to find more work-life balance and find a space and an environment where they can thrive inside and outside of work. So really excited to talk to you today about Cadence and how that plays into what you guys are building and working on too.
So great for us to have you on because I'm really conscious that we've had lots of people, different people that we've been talking to about hybrid and distributed work, but we haven't had anybody really representing, I would say, employees who want to do things differently and are already doing things differently and it's working out really well for them.
To have the option to choose is what I think is one of the most powerful things about remote work and distributed work, because it might work best for someone to work from home and be able to, be there for the kids when they're home, or choose to travel and explore a new place and explore a new timeline. And for me, the time zones that were most helpful are not necessarily the 9 to 5 in the US, but keeping that 9 to 5 and shifting it like either before or after. And that's so powerful too, to be able to see when you feel most productive or see when it works best for you and getting more time back in your day before or after, while still getting all of the same work done too, is one of my pieces that I didn't get before when I was just working a typical like 9 to 5 set standard hours.
Yeah, and so I'd love to dig into that with you, having the option and what that means for an employee, what that means for the culture of the organization. And of course, there are some roles that it is possible for, and there are some that it is not. But at Cadence, we're,
Mhm.
big believers in not just managing by exception. So can you talk to that? I mean, people must say to you, yeah, but not everybody's going to be able to do this. And
Mm.
there's just so much, I think, fear, right?
On the employee side, I think it's great for hiring. Like, I have so many friends who now are like, I will not work at a company unless they're fully remote. And even more so, my friends who are digital nomads, it's like even a level above that now. It's like, I've worked for a company that's remote, but they only let me travel like a month per year. So now, like, their expectations of flexibility, like, it's getting higher up on like their levels of what they really care about when they accept an
Yeah,
offer, when they're searching for work. Because it does
yeah,
two things. It's like trust. Also, it's like you're working for a company that trusts you, and that's a big thing too. It's
yeah,
like, and then it's performance too. So it's like, if you're performing, it shouldn't matter the environment that you are working in. And I always say too, like, even if you're staying exactly like in your hometown or the city, that that doesn't necessarily yield better results, because there's so many factors that contribute to someone's personal success of work. And it could
yeah,
be, they could be in an environment where they're super isolated during remote work and they have no
yeah,
creativity and very unhappy, and there's no co-working spots near them, so they book a trip to wherever and there's a co-working spot, and they're able to do more, like, have a more balanced lifestyle, and that also can yield more productivity. So I think it's just kind of flipping the script of like, and questioning like what the fear comes from an employer's side.
for me, it's like a lot of things, it's just still a bit of an unknown for some organizations. How are we going to make this possible when it's just not been something that's happened regularly for our team? So how do we introduce more remote work and the possibility to work remotely without creating some kind of like seismic horrendous impacts on the organization? Like I hear that kind of thing from leaders. Like it just feels too big a change. And like you said, I think the key theme here is trust.
If you do a poll based on like what your employees care about, like, I've heard talking to other digital nomads too, like some people would rather stay at a company they feel really supported in and have the ability to work asynchronously and have this independence as a worker, then like some other benefits or like salary increase than previous years before, and just what employees are looking for has really shifted. And to have that independence and trust, I think, is becoming more and more important for people to have that like work-life balance. But like the benefit of remote work for employees, and I've heard so many cases of like, I applied to this company because I'm like various things, like I'm disabled, so I need to work remote. I won't even look at any other companies that aren't because of this. Or I talked to this guy and he was like, I'm insecure of my balding or something, so I only wanted to be on Zoom calls. You just like never really know people's reasoning, and I think people always associate it to travel of necessary, and like the option is always there, but I think there's so many other reasons why the option to have remote work is important.
Yeah, and I feel like I have been a little bit guilty in the first part of this conversation of going down that route of that most people must go down. It's about some exotic location and having the option to be there, and that, as you say, could be part of it. But there's so much more of a broader discussion here, isn't there, about well-being, which is, I know, something that you feel really strongly about, you talk about, and you post about.
I think that's something that I learned a lot about testing different hours. Like I mentioned, working early in the morning in Hawaii, and then in Mexico, I was working still similarly like a 9 to 5. And then working now in Europe, and then I was working in South Africa. So when I was in South Africa, the hours I was working was like 2 to 10, or 11, or 3 to 11 or so. So it was amazing to have the mornings to, question what's normal or typical of, like, you set an alarm, you wake up, you start working right away, to then switch that to be like, okay, and I have my mornings. You'd have a morning routine, you'd be able to meet up with people. And for me, like building friendships in South Africa too. It was amazing to like have that time with them if they weren't working till later as well, or other nomads who had different schedules as well. And then have that differences of being able to go for a hike, go to the beach, be more like present for lunch, because sometimes you're on a lunch break for like 15-30 minutes, and having that option, and then being able to start working. And then it's all just a question of like knowing your priorities and what you like. Because for me, I'd rather have the whole most of the day than my night. But for some people, they'd rather have their night and enjoy a night out, dinner. But I found that I felt most enjoyment and most fulfillment being able to have that day before, and then show up like really energized and ready to work around like 2 p.m. So yeah, that's something that like I've loved. And then my break for lunch would come normally around like dinner and sunset time. So it's like, how can you have more balance and like find what works for you and when you feel most creative too? And not everyone's going to have the same creative energy from just a typical 9 to 5.
People are going to look back, hopefully my children look back and are like, what were you guys doing? Knowing yourself better
Yeah.
so that you can
Yeah.
work better benefits everybody.
It allows you to discover those things. Like the power of remote work is that I would have never known anything different than a 9 to 5 unless I was working for a company that was remote. And I think the environment for me matters a lot. It's like normally people have a desk and you sit at the desk and you work there, but depending on the type of work that you're doing, like I love working outside. Like that's when I feel the most productive. That's when I enjoy it the most. And I think we're all just kind of programmed to be like, no, this is work. So you need to be on your monitor inside at your desk and like focused. But I've found working outside, and depending on the type of work that I'm doing, I enjoy it more and I get more creativity from it. I have friends that have a desk in the summers, they have a desk that they put outside, and they're like, I work barefoot and I'm in the grass, and that's what works for me. And we do great and we hit all of our numbers and I'm happy. And I think that's also just how stuff is shifting of your environment of where you are working from. And two, for me, I work from home, but I always say like also I work from coffee shops more than I work from my like actual physical home. And that also works for me. I like being in that environment around other people doing similar work, having those chats with people, and that's how you kind of can combat like loneliness of being isolated in your place too. So um yeah, I think the balance of environment also can really help too with the shift in time zones.
They could offer something a little bit more like that sort of environment in their offices. You know, plenty of offices have some outside space. Could people be working outside, sitting on the grass? It strikes me that there's learnings here, all the way along the spectrum. We'd love to hear your tips for anybody thinking about wanting to do more remote work or go fully remote. How would you suggest they approach that with their managers?
It's a very exciting phase too, and I think there's a lot of steps that can go into it, but it's one, doing your own research on the environment first of where you want to go. I think location matters a lot, especially in your first month of going fully remote or doing digital nomad life. Like I mentioned before, in Mexico, I seeked out like a different co-working community that I joined, and the places I've been that have had the best experience have been when there's community of other digital nomads or other people working remotely. So I would say identify all of that on your own first, of like your vision of where you want to go, how you're going to do it, and then setting those hours for me was helpful in the beginning to say like I'm going to work New York hours no matter where I travel to. I don't think that's necessary. I think asynchronous is possible for some companies, but if you're just getting started and you're introducing this concept to a company, I would recommend just keeping those set hours, and then in time building that trust, building that communication to then be like, I could be more asynchronous. Like I could get this project done by this date, or we have one set time on Wednesdays where we meet at this mutual time. Other than that, like I'm doing these hours. But I think the two most important things is communication and trust with your employer. And I think there's no such thing as like over communicating. So I've always been very open about everywhere I am, and it makes you feel less stressed as an employee, because it's stressful too. If you're in Portugal and your Wi-Fi goes out, it feels so much different than you're back in New York City and your Wi-Fi goes out. And it's just the stress that from an employee side, I don't think employers really get, because it's like you have this added layer of pressure. And sometimes there's actually, which is a whole separate conversation, but like performance pressure too, to even like overperform. So there was a phase when I like started traveling that you actually find yourself working even more because you're like, oh, I'm in this place. So you have to like prove yourself. So I would also say like be hesitant of overworking too. And like just because you're switching environments and locations, like you still you still can work the same amount that you'd be working from the location you were just at before. And just having that trust and communication, and really ensuring you're working for a manager that like understands and gets that too. And you'll teach them along the way as well. Like the companies I've worked with, like it was so inspiring to have that confidence to say like, I want to go here, I'm going to do it this way. And then the trickle down effect of how other people start to live their lives like that. And then I had coworkers reach out being like, I'm going to go move, travel here and do this, and like taking advice that way. So if you have a desire to do that, I think it will impact more people also than just yourself.
I also encourage people listening to just ask. Like, I think often we assume that the answer is no, don't we? If it hasn't been done before or we haven't seen it done. So yeah, thanks for being an inspiration for so many people who could be doing things differently, and work such a big part of our lives. So
Of course. And I always say we work to live, not live to work. And I think that quote really helps me in my decisions of like how I want to live my life. And with the companies that I work with, and with the friendships that I make, and with managers, when you're choosing companies that you're working with, is like knowing if that value is really important to you. Like, what does that look like in your day to day? And how can you have more balance while really enjoying work that's fulfilling too?
this conversation leaves me hopeful, Paige. Thank you.
Good.